For using display flex, we'll be requiring a container and a couple of child elements. Here we have a container div and two child divs. I'll go to the container div and apply display flex. On applying display flex, it creates a main axis and a cross axis. Once we have assigned display as flex, the elements or the items inside the container gets aligned across the main axis. Now, since we haven't defined any particular direction for this flex box, the default direction will be, or the default main axis will be the row. Now if you want to change that, we can do flex direction to be row, which is the default one. Now let's say I want to reverse the items alongside the main axis or the horizontal axis. I can simply type in row reverse. Once I do that, you can see that the items are aligned in a reverse manner on the main axis or on the row axis. Similarly, if you want the items to be aligned vertically, we can go for flex direction column, which aligns the items or which stacks the items on top of each other in a vertical manner. Here also we have an option to align the items in a reverse manner on the column, for which we can use column reverse. Let's make the flex direction as row again and go to your index page and add a couple of more child elements. No matter how many divs or child elements I add inside the container, they all are accommodated inside the container. The child elements inside the display flex container has a default value for flex shrink as 1. Now what this flex shrink 1 does is, whenever the child inside the display flex container gets overflown, it gets shrink by a factor of 1 and gets accommodated or fit inside the flex container. Now if I remove this 1 to 0 or change this 1 to 0, it won't work actually. So at that time, if I make it 0, you can see that child or the children's inside the display flex container gets overflown. I'll just make it 1. Display flex also sets a default value for flex wrap, which by default is a no wrap. So that's the reason why it's showing up in a single line. You can also wrap it into multiple lines by setting it as wrap. Also, we can reverse it also by using wrap reverse. Now I'll just remove these properties from here. Flex wrap and flex shrink. I'll also remove the extra divs that I added. Now I have only 2 divs here inside the display flex container. Now we also have something called flex grow. By default, display flex sets this value as 0. So what flex grow does is, if you can see here, we have some extra spaces here inside the flex container. You can make it 1, and what will happen is the extra space will be distributed by a factor of 1 and will be utilized by the existing childs. Now inside the flex container, we have a couple of more properties using which we can rearrange the content. The first one will be justify content, using which we can arrange the content to be on the flex start, which by default it is right now. We can do it like flex end, which takes it to the end of the flex. We can also provide center, which takes it to the center of the flex container. Similarly, we have other options like to the baseline, left, right, say space around, right, space around. What space around does is it creates a space around the child elements, and we have space in between, which creates a space in between the child elements. And similarly, we have space evenly, which creates an even space among the children's from the div. Similarly, we can align the items vertically too, using align items to the center. So you can see, using align items on the center, we can align it vertically to center, to first baseline, to flex start, or to flex end. Takes it down, right? And we have some other properties also to flex start, end, center, right? We can use justify content here also to center, yeah, that way. Now the next property that you can have a look at is the order property. Using order, we can specify the order or the sequence for the child elements. So for that, I'll just define the individual styles, individual classes for the childs. Div 1, div 2. Inside div 1, currently you can see it's div 1, div 2. So by default, the ordering is like order 0. And it's order 1. Now I can change this order. I can make this 1. I can make this 0. You can see div 2 comes in front, right? So that way you can reorganize the order of the child components using, or the child elements using order property inside your Flex container. Another property that we can have a look at, another property is gap property. So let's remove the justify stuff and all. I'll just remove these things. It goes back. I'll just add a couple of more components, or like 2 components. Or let's say I'll add 4, and I'll set a wrap on this thing. Flex wrap, right? Now you can see here that I have 2 rows in here. Now let's say I want to set some gap between the columns or between the rows. I can set something called row gap as 10 pixel, you can see, or like maybe 20 pixels, right, or 100 pixels. This way I can, using row gap, I can set the gap between the 2 columns. Similarly, I can also set a gap between columns also. So I'll just move it to column. I'll just, yeah, you can see the row gap. So this, for columns it's column gap, for row it's row gap. I change it to column. I can also use a common value for both row and column called gap, like 50 pixels. So that applies to both columns and the rows. So I hope you find this video useful. Do let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching.